World War II had a massive effect on the United States. And this doesn't even consider the Cold War, which of course was itself an enormous effect. Um, let's divide these consequences of the war into different categories. One would be the political effects. There was an experience during the war of shared sacrifice that tended to level out differences and bring the American people together. Uh, there was a sense of shared obligation also to veterans. The nation wanted to do something good for those who had sacrificed so much to win this war. Uh, another consequence was a very large federal government. It was permanently larger. The old days of a small government would never return, and part of this is because the standing army, the military, permanent military, was so much larger, and that, of course, related to the Cold War. There was a better image for business. Business had a very bad image during the Depression for obvious reasons. They were the enemy in a lot of labor disputes. People were resentful of having to do without when some business people were so wealthy. But business comes off as more patriotic during the war, and there's a greater sense of cooperation for a common goal. There is a very strong desire for stability, and this gives rise eventually to what we know as the 1950s. Uh, look at what the nation had been through in the last 15 years. You had basically 10 years of depression, followed by 5 years of war, or at least 4 years of war in which the U.S. was involved. Uh, and of course, the war itself lasted for 6 years. So you had this period of about 15 years when there was a tremendous amount of upheaval, of activism, and people wanted a break. They wanted to retreat to their backyard barbecue and live a quiet life. Now, these are images of the way that the American people were encouraged to sacrifice for the war effort. I mean, there's nothing subtle about it. Down on the bottom there, sacrifice for freedom. Uh, defend your country, enlist now in the army. When you ride alone, you ride with Hitler. So share your ride, save gasoline. You talk of sacrifice. He knew the meaning of sacrifice. And this was a message that many, many Americans responded to. Uh, it takes taxes and bonds. Pay higher taxes willingly, but also buy war bonds. We'll take care of the rising sun. You take care of rising prices. Don't gouge people uh, in paying in charging prices. Pay your share of taxes. Reduce our debts. Buy what you need. Make do what you have for a longer time. Follow the rationing rules, etc. Now, we can also talk about economic effects of World War II. There was a pent-up demand. This is especially noticeable in automobiles, in housing, in all kinds of consumer goods. What that means is that, like a dam, demand for these things is building up and building up because you mostly couldn't buy them during the war. There were no new cars being made during the war. There was almost no housing being built during the war because all the resources of the country were going into the war effort. And now that the war was over, demand was zooming. Now, of course, the other side of that coin was that people were making good money during the war. They were working a lot of overtime. There was almost no unemployment, and they couldn't buy these things. So they had money saved up, and they were ready and anxious to spend it in most cases. Um, Now, all of this, demand and increased spending does lead to some inflation, but it's fairly short-lived. It doesn't last all that long. And the immediate post-war problems of Some unemployment because the defense plants were converting back to civilian use. And there were returning veterans from the war, etc. Those were short-term adjustments, along with the inflation. But not long after the war, the country saw the beginning of an economic boom that would last for a quarter of a century or so. Wages were high as a result of the war. There was inflation, of course, so the value of the wages wasn't going up as much as the dollar figures would suggest. But the fear that people had that they would return to the Depression turned out to be unfounded. There were jobs to be had, unions were strong, and they were able to negotiate better wages. And there was enormous demand for consumer goods of all kinds. And consumerism certainly is a hallmark of this period. Uh, People wanted all those things that they couldn't have during the war. They wanted refrigerators. Not too long after the war, when television, just a few short years in the late 40s, television came into play, and this absolutely captivated the nation's imagination. Housing, new suburbs just exploded in size. Places like Levittown, New York, or locally Warren, Michigan, increased many-fold over the decade of the 50s. People moving into the suburbs, not so much to escape the city, but to embrace this new suburban lifestyle. A larger yard, a backyard swimming pool, a barbecue, a two-car garage, things like that. Um, and this ushers in also at least one of the golden ages of the car culture. There were all sorts of new stylings, new designs, tail fins in the 50s, all sorts of colors and new styles. It was just an amazing time for the auto industry as well. As I said, union membership was up, and these were good middle-class wages. This period, for about 25 years or so, or a little more after World War II, was really the last time, or the only time perhaps, when people who didn't have a lot of skills could get good jobs that paid living wages and could have secure jobs. We know that's not true today. If you don't have an education, your economic prospects are exceedingly bleak in this economy. But in those days, they really weren't. The middle class grew enormously as a result of these good wages and as a result of something we'll get to, which is the GI Bill, the access to higher education that Congress provided. And there was a more equal distribution of wealth. Taxes were high on upper income people. Believe it or not, the highest tax rate for a few of the very wealthiest people, income tax rate was 91% in the 50s. And that, believe it or not, happened under a Republican president, Dwight Eisenhower. There were all sorts of demographic changes, population changes as a result during and after the war. There was a large movement of people to the cities and to the coasts, the east and west coasts, as well as to the industrial cities of the north of the Midwest. And a lot of this movement remained after the war. People liked it in California, for example, and a lot of them wanted to stay there. Rural areas declined. And the growth of cities was spectacular. A lot of migration happened from the south to the north. In Detroit alone during World War II, there were 350,000 people who migrated into the city, most of them from the south, both white and black, the majority white in this period. There was a decline of regional differences. more and more people were traveling outside of the area of their birth for the first time. So you get a softening of these very strong accents that would be associated with one part of the country or another. Also, television contributed to this because there was a standard American English, a broadcast English. Another decline of regional differences resulted from chains and later from interstate highways. So that you could drive for hundreds of miles and get off at the interstate and find something that looked just like what you knew at home. McDonald's and Burger King, etc. We're moving ahead, a good bit beyond World War II, but this process begins coming out of the war. Um, there were also social effects of the war. Women's role in work was much greater during the war, and their expectations went up. They got a taste of a life that many women had not had a chance to live before that. Some of this happened during World War I, but this was a new generation of women who were experiencing opportunities that they hadn't had before. There was a sense of great confidence after victory, a sense that we were on top of the world as a nation, that the United States was the world's strongest nation, uh, militarily, economically, socially. Uh, and as I've already mentioned, there was a yearning to live normal lives. There was nothing normal about the Depression. There was nothing normal about the biggest war in human history. A lot of people wanted to settle down. Later on, their children, the baby boomers, would look at those lives and say they were boring and they wanted some adventure. They wanted new things. But after the war, people just wanted to, uh, a lot like 1920, the idea of a return to normalcy. Well, some of that spirit existed after World War II as well. And of course, a major social effect was the baby boom. A lot of those returning veterans, uh, you know, took advantage of their return home to begin families. Family sizes were large, uh, and the age of marriage tended to get younger, which meant that the childbearing years of women were extended. And this, of course, continues to have effects down to the present day as the baby boom generation is moving into retirement years now. Um, the GI Bill can hardly be uh, overestimated in its importance. It did a lot of things. Two of the most important were that it provided a higher education for returning soldiers and sailors. Free. You could go to college, and the government would pay for it. This is generally regarded to be one of the most successful pieces of social legislation in American history. It also provided a lot of help in housing, in uh, buying that first home, and of course that gave a big boost to the housing industry. There's a blot on this, though. There's a dark side to it, and that is that this housing was mostly racially segregated, and the same opportunities for housing were not extended to African Americans as were extended to whites. You get a sense of a few more of the posters of the war. I mean, again, playing up the role of women. Here's a very famous poster uh, showing this is Rosie the Riveter. And when your life changes that much, you don't just go back to the way things used to be without having been permanently affected by those changes. Um, this was the bomber plant that we've discussed in Ypsilanti, Michigan. A lot of these women wanted to keep their jobs, but couldn't after the war. This production stopped, and men wanted their jobs back also. Uh, some women, on the other hand, wanted to get out of the workforce. They wanted that more traditional life of being housewives. It just depended on the individual woman. Both phenomena were true. You get a sense of just the sheer scale. Uh, of all sorts of things that the war created. Finally, let's look at the effect of World War II on minorities. A. Philip Randolph complained strongly to Roosevelt that there was blatant discrimination in hiring in companies that did defense work. He threatened a march on Washington, and Roosevelt responded by creating the Fair Employment Practices Commission. That had some effects. It did some good things, but it did not solve the problem. There was also, as we've said, a whole lot of migration during the war, and a lot of this migration led to conflict, such as the horrendous race riot in Detroit in 1943, and a lot of other examples of that sort of thing. When you take rural whites from the Jim Crow South and blacks from the Jim Crow South, also rural, and you compress them together in a city with a lot of stress, with long hours of work, and housing shortages, that is a recipe for conflict. The number of Hispanics in the country doubled as a result of the war. And returning veterans, here I'm talking about African American veterans, were not willing to go back to business as usual. One of the common phrases was the double V, victory over Germany and Japan, but also victory over Jim Crow. And when the White South just wanted to go back to business as usual, the result was the early stirrings, really, the early signs of a civil rights movement, which would gather steam over the years following the war until it reached its culmination in the 1960s with the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act of 1964 and 65. There was a tremendous amount of opposition to segregation in the military. It began to weaken a bit during the war, but finally, the final blow against racial segregation was struck by President Truman in 1948 when he simply ended it in the military. He could not get civil rights legislation through Congress because Southern Democrats had too much power in Congress, too much ability to block legislation. But as commander-in-chief, he had the authority to desegregate the military himself, and he exercised that authority in 1948. The rhetoric of the war, the reasons that were presented for fighting it, often had to do with democratic ideals. Our system of democracy and freedom was contrasted with the rigidly repressive systems of Hitler and Mussolini and Tojo in Japan. You know, a lot of minorities took this talk seriously, said, okay, fine, we fought a war for democracy and freedom. Now let's see some of it for ourselves right here. Why is it a good thing for Germany and not a good thing for us? There were also some cultural, crossovers, like swing music, jazz music that, which, of course, swing is in that jazz, genre. And there were more sharing. There was more sharing of musical tastes, and cultural boundaries began to soften a bit as a result of the war. And all of this laid the groundwork for what would later become a full-blown civil rights movement.